Who are the Jewish people? Who are they? Why do we care? How many Jews are in the world today? Let's have a look at the top 50 countries with the largest Jewish populations. As for the size of world Jewry, at the start of the year 2013, we're talking about a scant 13.9 million, or 1 out of every 457 people in the world today being Jewish. That's a sliver of a sliver. Israel, of course, leads the pack with almost 6 million Jews, followed by the United States with almost 5.5 million. Other countries, especially after the Holocaust, lag considerably behind. And yet the impact of the Jews on world civilization is beyond speaking, and nobody can deny the enormous Jewish influence on our world today. And that makes the Jewish people worth studying. First question we should ask is, how far back can we trace the Jewish people? Answer, about 4,000 years, to around 2000 BCE. It's the age of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Location? Mesopotamia, part of the so-called Fertile Crescent. It's the earliest civilization on the face of the earth. Think about it. Civilization actually begins in a place called Sumer. It started with an agricultural revolution. Villages sprang up around 5000 BCE. There were multiple communities, city-states as it were, centered around temples and managed by priests. Each had gods and goddesses galore, usually human in form. These deities had interesting reputations. They were petty, capricious, and definitely hungry. After all, the priests made sure they had 4 meals a day. One ancient list of offerings includes 21 first-class rams, 2 large bulls, 8 lambs, 30 birds, 5 ducks, 4 wild boars, 3 ostrich eggs, and a partridge in a pear tree. Not really, but you get the idea. Around 3000 BCE, Mesopotamian city-states were flourishing. Places like Eridu, Erech, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, and of great interest to us, Ur, the supposed birthplace of Abraham and his family. Mesopotamian merchants traveled back and forth to Syria, Egypt, and the land called Canaan. They built dikes to hold back the rivers and keep them from flooding. They were responsible for many remarkable new innovations, architectural innovations, including great towers called ziggurats reaching into the heavens. Their inventions included glass, the potter's wheel, the kiln, the sailboat, the plow, and wheeled vehicles. And we shouldn't forget their greatest invention of all, barley beer. And we know from their ancient cuneiform tablets, the ones that have come down to us, that they drank a lot of it. Question, why would Abraham leave such a place? Mesopotamia had it all. If I were advising Abraham, I would have said, get a good education, settle down, become a professional, marry a nice Jewish girl. But hit the road and become a wandering nomad? What, are you nuts? Meshuggah? We can only speculate about some of the troubling deficits in ancient Mesopotamian culture. For example, everywhere we look in their ancient writings, we find a good deal of fatalism. It's evident in the literature of the ancient Sumerians. We have many examples, such as the pessimistic dialogue between master and servant, where the servant simply echoes everything the master says. In general, people felt helpless before the forces of nature. There may be ample rain, the crops will flourish, or perhaps a horrible deluge that will carry us all away. We could argue that it's actually easier than monotheism, which demands an explanation for everything that happens. You can't simply say, well, Marduk was mad today. When stuff happens, it's usually somebody's fault. Consider the whole host of Mesopotamian gods. There was An, the sky god, Enlil, the god of the atmosphere. Enki, the god of the primordial waters. They were usually at war with each other, just like the quarreling city-states on the earth below. And in everything, there was an overwhelming sense of desolation. So, eat, drink plenty of that barley beer, and be merry, for tomorrow, who knows? Then there were the nature gods, all aspects of the cosmos, the inner force behind what we see in the world around us. There was Nana, the visible moon, and the moon god. There was Utu, the visible sun, and the power within. All were immortal, lest part of the cosmos itself should die. As with any culture, we have tales of valor, such as those surrounding the warlord of Uruk named Gilgamesh, who lived around 2500 BCE. In the ancient cuneiform tablets, we read about his search for immortality. But the only immortality he actually achieved were the many tales about him. We are told that he traveled to meet the sage Utnapishtim, who had been saved from a great flood and given eternal life. Shades of Noah. The story itself dates to the 1700s BCE, long before the Hebrew Bible and its Noah story were conceivably set to writing. Question: what do you think, Watson? Did the Bible plagiarize the Gilgamesh epic? Consider some of the parallels between the two stories. Genesis describes how humanity had become obnoxious to God. In the Babylonian story, they were too numerous and noisy. The gods, or God, decided to send a worldwide flood. That's in both. This would drown men, women, children, babies, and infants, as well as eliminate all of the land animals and birds. The gods, or God, knew of one righteous man, Utnapishtim, or Noah. The gods, or God, ordered the story's hero to build a multi-storied wooden ark called a chest or box in the original Hebrew. And there are many others. Bottom line, this looks like a job for the biblical mythbusters. What do you think? Is Noah's Ark busted?
It's busted.
Okay, we'll call it busted.
All right.
Shh! Don't tell Russell Crowe. Bear in mind, we have other Mesopotamian myths that sound a lot like biblical stories. Enki ate forbidden fruit in a paradise called Dilmun. Sounds a bit like Eden. Etana flew to heaven to receive the gift of kingship. Reminds us of the early biblical patriarch named Enoch. What about these biblical stories? Not a few modern critics will say,
busted.
Busted.
but we'll simply say, so let it be written, so let it be done.
So let it be written. So let it be done.
Who was Abraham? Was there an Abraham? Are there any other biblical stories we can bust? Time for some history. Consider that around 2200 BCE, Sumer was attacked by the great king Sargon of Akkad. Though a great leader, he was of humble birth, and his mother was said to have set him adrift in the Euphrates River. What do you think, Watson? Sound like anyone we know? Moses, perhaps? Is the Moses story busted?
So this one's busted.
Busted. Busted.
Inquiring minds disagree, but everyone agrees that Sargon went on to conquer almost all of Sumeria. In 2180 BCE, Sargon died and Akkad collapsed. Sumeria regained power, and Abraham's town, Ur, center of the moon cult, rose to prominence. Around 2000 BC, a nomadic group called the Amorites flooded in. Curiously, the back and forth travels of the Amorites across the ancient Near East closely resembled the biblical travels of Abraham. While not a few scholars question whether Abraham ever existed, others see this as circumstantial evidence that Abraham may have been not only a historical figure, but himself an Amorite. It's also curious that the biblical book of Joshua declares, "In olden times your ancestors worshipped other gods." Could this be a faint reference to Abrahamic times? Could it be that Abraham's family left ancient Ur about the time that the Amorites came in? The Bible narrates that Abraham and troop traveled on to Haran, where he received his famous calling from God, then on to Shechem, Egypt, Beersheba, and Hebron. It's exactly the path of the Amorite dispersion. Of course, issues abound. Did Abraham indeed exist? And what kind of proof could we offer? What about Isaac and the famous story of Abraham almost offering him up as a sacrifice? How about the famous story of Abraham schmoozing with God in a tent? Sound historical? Are such stories for the birds?
It's busted.
It's busted.
But we should also remember an important principle of scholarship. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Meanwhile, over in Canaan, new cities had cropped up. Megiddo, Lachish, Hatzor, Bet-El, Gaza, all established centuries before Abraham arrived on the scene. And ancient Jericho had already stood for some 6,000 years, the oldest city on earth. The Canaanites prayed to their chief god, El, the equivalent of the Hebrew Bible's word for God, Elohim. El was kind and merciful, a creator god called holy, the three-letter root QDS, equivalent to the Hebrew root word kadosh, holy. El had a son named Baal, frequently referenced in the Bible. Baal was virtuous and locked in battle with the forces of chaos. El also manifested as Hadad, the god of storm, thunder, lightning, and the rider of the clouds. His consort was Astarte or Astarte, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. Canaanite myths were recorded in ancient Ugaritic. In the beginning, we are told, the world was created out of darkness, wind-shaped air, and miry chaos. Baal fought Yam, god of the primordial sea, for dominion of the world. Baal died, but miraculously returned to life. Sound familiar? Bottom line, the biblical account was not produced in a vacuum. We always have to check it against other ancient accounts. Did one account borrow from another? We can't prove that the patriarchs existed, but we know a lot about the ancient cultures they were said to inhabit. And now, Watson, you know the rest of the story.
Only now you know the rest of the story.
So let it be written.
So let it be done.